Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, Patricia Monna Intuitive Consulting. Today, I have the honor of interviewing my teacher, Paul Elder, teacher and mentor, because man, Paul, the way you teach, it is out of this world, literally. Paul teaches remote viewing at the Monroe Institute in Faber, Virginia. He also was the owner and facilitator of Monroe Canada, Monroe Institute Canada, but he has recently retired from that and he's now teaching at the original Monroe Institute down in Faber, Virginia. So, welcome, Paul. Thank you so much for coming on my YouTube channel. It really is an honor to be able to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. It literally is a pleasure. Thank you very much.
So, I want to talk about my favorite subject and probably yours too, remote viewing. But before I throw a bunch of questions at you, can you tell everyone who's watching, how did you get into remote viewing? Where did it all start?
Oh, wow. It probably started when I was 12 years old. You see, I've had several near-death experiences. I died a few times. And I drowned when I was 12 years old and had this amazing experience. But when you're 12 years old and weird stuff happens, you go, that was weird, and you go on with life, right? I didn't realize until many years later how much that had changed me internally. And then when I was 17, I was involved in a wild car accident and got crushed up really bad and had another experience. And the main one, or the biggest one at that particular time, um, when I was 41 years old and I was playing hockey, old timers hockey. Oh my God! And I had a heart attack in the middle of the hockey game and died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. And had another amazing experience. And they brought me back and in the emergency room, and I did not want to be back because I was going home. What happened after that, though? See, I've been involved in a whole bunch of different things throughout my life, and I tell people sometimes, well, um, I'm a former broadcaster and a former politician, mainstream politician, and the only reason I tell people that is to check to see if they're awake. Because broadcasters or newsmen and politicians aren't the kind of people that would ever stretch the truth, right?
Don't we know that after
Well,
2020?
yeah, well, yeah. But I spent 10 years in broadcasting, including a stretch at CTV in Calgary. This is way back through the 70s. I was a rock and roll disc jockey, and then got into news and eventually into CTV network up on the hill there in Calgary. And I worked with this guy named Ralph Klein, and I'm sure some of you might remember him.
Yes, very
Ralph Ralph was a beauty. He was yeah, he was amazing. And I'm sorry he isn't with us anymore, but Ralph did some amazing things. In any case, that was sort of the background, and then I moved back to Saskatchewan and got involved in politics, and I was the mayor of a city for a whole bunch of years. And this is when all of this began to happen. While I was the mayor of this little city, around 18,000 people, Swift Current, Saskatchewan, for a whole bunch of years. And I began to, I had heard of out of body experiences. And, and where that came about, in around 1981, I watched this interview with a guy named Robert Monroe. And he had written a book called Journeys Out of the Body. And he was talking about out of body experiences. And I thought, that's interesting. I wonder, that was kind of like when I died. And I borrowed the book from the library, never even bought it, and read it from cover to cover. And I thought, and I took it back and I thought, this is very interesting, but this guy's a nut job. And lo and behold, 12 years later, or whatever it was, late 80s, early 90s, one
good.
night I found myself floating at the ceiling of my bedroom. And
Yes.
one of the first things that came to my mind, looking down and seeing myself in bed and my wife in bed, one of the first things that came to my mind was, holy crap, Monroe wasn't crazy. This was real.
Hmm.
What that little event did, I mean, little, I say little, it was probably one of the most profound experiences of my life. What that did is it changed my view on everything. I Um, I spent a whole bunch of years, as I mentioned, in politics, and I was going to get into more serious politics, into party politics, and this happened on a Friday night, and this was in Swift Current, Saskatchewan, where they were putting together. Um, I was a vice president of the Conservative Party in Saskatchewan,
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
and but not elected, right? And they wanted me to run for MLA.
Mhm.
And I thought that would be okay. Yeah, I can do that. The nomination meeting was on Monday evening, and Friday night is when this happened,
Mm.
and it blew my mind. And so the next day, I went to the library and I discovered that Bob Monroe had written another book called Far Journeys, and I borrowed it, and because we didn't have a bookstore like that in town, and I read it from cover to cover again, and I found out that he had created this special school or special facility in Virginia. Bob Monroe was a former broadcaster, much like I was, but he was back in the days of radio, and he actually created. He was an executive producer for radio shows like The Shadow and all of those old ones that you're way too young to remember. And but I used to listen to those, and it was just that was the only thing we had. Was before television, and I grew up in the middle on a farm in the middle of nowhere in Saskatchewan with 10 brothers and sisters. Saying that we were Catholic would be redundant. So my my mother had 8 girls in a row, and then she figured out what was happening, and she had 3 boys, and I'm the 10th out of 11 kids.
Wow.
And literally, like I say, with not a pot to pee in, or just really poor out in the middle of nowhere in Saskatchewan,
Mhm.
where when you grow up that way, you're not apt to believe in any far-fetched fairy tales about things, right? Um, so I wouldn't have believed a word that I'm telling you, except it happened and had such a profound effect on me. And I'll just briefly tell you about a couple of the things that that made a difference in my life. The drowning, of course. But I'm 12 years old in the middle of the prairies, and we had these places. Folks in the city won't recognize the term dugout, but those were in the prairies when they needed ground or needed ground for the road or earth for the road. They would just dig a hole beside the road, which would serve 2 purposes. It would give them all sorts of ground for the foundation of the road, and it would also create a place where water could settle and it provide water to the farmer.
Mhm.
So on this particular Saturday, when I was 12 years old, um, our cousins from the big city of Edmonton, who had swimming pools and things like that, came to visit. And next thing you know, we were out in the country in the middle of the nowhere chasing gophers or something like that. And we came upon this pond where one of the neighbor's kids or whatever had left or abandoned a raft. And before you know it, we're all bouncing around on this raft. And the thing about my little brother and I is that we couldn't swim a lick, didn't have a clue. And our parents, our mom had warned us, like, stay away from those ponds. And we hadn't been in a lake or anything like that. And so, wouldn't you know it, if you wonder why you've had no bad luck in your life, it's because Murphy lives with me. So, so the next thing I know, I fell off. My cousin thought it would really be funny to rock the raft, and especially when he found out that we were terrified of water. And
Mhm.
so my luck, I fell off the raft, and before I know it, I'm floating to the bottom of this pond.
Wow.
And I didn't even have the sense of mind to dog paddle. It was just like, okay, I'm screwed.
Wow.
And sinking into this pond until I could feel my feet in the mud, and it was about 12 to 15 feet deep. And I must have kicked or pushed or something because I floated up again. And I know I did that because the water became clearer, and I don't know if my head ever broke the surface. And then I sank again. And the most amazing thing happened. As I'm partway down, floating down, when all the air went out, because we've all had this experience where, whether you're in a pool or a pond or in the ocean or in a lake, and you suck in a big gulp of water, and the instant panic that hits and thrashing about. And well, guess what? When all the air goes out and the water comes in and replaces it, there's no struggle. It's absolutely peaceful.
Really?
Totally.
Wow.
And because guess why? I mean, there is no struggle in your lungs. Your lungs are full. And maybe, and this, an amazing sense of peacefulness came over me. And maybe it makes sense because we spent the first 9 months of our lives in a liquid environment.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't that be a natural state?
Mm-hmm.
But it shocked me because I had no idea. In fact, I was concerned that I wasn't concerned because
Wow.
it was like, this is cool. But what happens eventually, you run out of oxygen and everything turned dark, and I went to sleep. And I don't know how long I was gone or clicked out, but I clicked back in with the jolt, and I was still in the pond, still in the water, but everything had changed. And I seemed to be in this bubble of some kind of energy in all of the colors in the rainbow. And it was so amazing to me because it was like each color felt different. It vibrated differently. And orange felt different than blue, and blue felt different than green. And it was such a remarkable moment in my life. I'm running my hands through the water, through these colors, going, oh my God, I didn't know you could feel colors. And the colors were vibrating right through my body. And it was so cool and so different. And it occurred to me that, hey, what is going on? Am I dead? Am I dying? And it was funny because the only reference I had to dead or die, I didn't even know anybody who died, was I had read the book Tom Sawyer just a few weeks before this, where Tom is
Mm-hmm.
believed to have drowned in the Mississippi, and he returns to the back of a church or something for his own memorial service or whatever, wondering who they're burying. And the next thing I know, I went shooting out of the water, literally in an instant, and I'm floating in the fire loft, the choir loft in the back of our Catholic church out in the country, looking down over this entire church,
Wow.
absolutely empty, and I'm floating, and I'm thinking, hey, if this is my funeral, my mom and dad would be here, my brothers and sisters, nobody in the church, but it's Saturday afternoon, right, at about 4 o'clock or whatever it was, and I'm floating. And I could just, with my mind, I could control. I could float over here, float over there. A few times I floated over the end of the choir loft, which is about 16 feet high, going, ooh, that's. And I'm thinking, Tom Sawyer didn't fly. I am flying. And all of a sudden, it was like somebody kicked me in the gut. And boom, I'm back on the shore. My cousin Brian has me upside down, and he's pumping the water out of me, and my face is literally in the mud, and the water's coming out, and it was just like, and it took about a couple of minutes for me to vomit all the water out or whatever, and we sat there, you know all four of us with eyes this big, going, oh my God, what happened? And so we made a deal that we'd never tell another human being because we were going to get in trouble big
Whoa.
time. And so then we walked really slow. We were about a mile and a half from home. We walked really slow on the way home until we got home, and I stayed the heck outside you know. And anyway, I'm out about 10 minutes later. I'm out in the yard, and I hear some kayang and cussing in German coming out of our house. And interestingly, somebody spilled the beans, but two kids got a good whacking on that day, and I was one of them.
What?
That'll, oh yeah, that'll
That
teach
was
you to
for
teach.
dying.
That'll
Oh my
that'll
goodness.
teach me to that'll teach me to die, right?
Don't. My
Pardon me.
goodness.
So it was, but what happened after that, and it was interesting because while we're walking very slowly on the way home to let our clothes dry, I'm telling my cousin Brian what happened, and he was like, "What, Tom Sawyer? Jesus, we thought you were dead." Oh, he doesn't listen. And so I told and shared that story with a couple of my sisters, and they were kind of like, "Hey, mom, want to check out the kid? Got water on the brain here." You
Wow.
know. So,
Mm.
well, what I discovered is that even though I wasn't totally aware of it, it seemed to have changed me. And that's the only thing I can think of that changed would have changed me because it's
Mm.
like I knew stuff after that.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure how when I say I knew stuff, um, I seem to have developed an ability to know where things were. I
Mm.
didn't, I'm 12 years old. I didn't think anything unique about it. But my sisters to this day can vouch for that because if something was missing or whatever, they would ask, they would say, "Ask Paul." And it was like, and I could see things in my mind. And so, which caused them to think sometimes that I was the one who took it.
Of course.
And sometimes I was. That's how you build your own legend. But it didn't, and and to this day, that was a very powerful part of it. And
Mm.
I'm not sure if it was I think what the most amazing thing is, what that taught me is maybe there's no such thing as dead.
Yeah.
If you show a 12-year-old that there's no such thing as dead, a 12-year-old farm boy, that is bad news. Because guess what? He showed a 12-year-old farm boy that there's no such thing as dead. Here, hold my beer. Watch this. And seriously, and it would be like, invincible. What's the worst that could happen? I get killed? No.
Yep,
Right?
exactly.
So we did some crazy stuff on the farm, back out of boredom and everything else. My little brother, this is when we were 15 and 16. We actually, and this is purely insane. We, out of boredom and testosterone and challenging each other, actually shot a tin can off each other's heads with a rifle.
Yeah, that's a little insane, but wow.
Yeah, it's a little bit much. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but we did some of the craziest things. So, anyway, what I've discovered is that, and it didn't ring to me that way that it had created an ability.
Hmm.
Um, but I think probably the most important thing that happened is even more than that, perhaps, was when I was 14. And I'll just tell you quickly and then get on with this story. It was on a Saturday afternoon, and I'm walking home from my cousin's house past that same church.
Hmm.
And in the churchyard, because my little brother and I were altar boys, we had to be. And there was a pair of wild turkeys that were in the churchyard. And we're talking about a 2-acre property or something like that with
Hmm.
ball diamonds, things like that. And on Sunday when we're going to church and stuff, you could hear the turkeys gobbling and flying about or whatever, rushing about. And so I'm walking past the church, and there's this row of trees that are like 60 feet high or whatever. And on the top of one of these trees, there was a huge nest.
Hmm.
And my 14-year-old brain thought, oh, that's maybe a turkey nest. I didn't know turkeys couldn't fly. and couldn't get up there.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd see them flapping across the yard, but
Hmm.
so I thought, oh my God. So I crawled up this tree as best I could, and I got up and because I wanted to see what was in that turkey nest. And I got up to the top where the nest, and it was a big nest, probably an eagle's nest.
Wow.
It was on a branch just over top of me, and I can hold it on with my hands. Excuse me. And I'm on my tiptoes on the branch below me with my hands on this, trying to, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what if a turkey reaches out and pecks me in the face? And then I'm thinking, yeah, but there could be little turkeys in there. And so I'm pulling like this and I'm trying to look into this nest. Excuse me. I have a bit of a hack today, pardon me. When all of a sudden, as I'm hanging on, all of a sudden the branch I was standing on broke.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I fell down through this tree, 50, 60 feet,
Wow.
5 or 6 stories. But the only thing that saved me from dying was I was hitting branches on the way down. But here was the interesting thing that blew my mind completely. After I hit the first branch just below or whatever, the next thing I know, I am floating in the tree, watching my body go boom, hit a
Wow.
branch, boom, until I landed on the ground and it knocked the wind out of me. I wasn't conscious of that. I was in the tree watching. And
Hmm.
I'm like looking down saying, get up. And all of a sudden it was like, I was awake and lying with the wind knocked out of me, lying on my back on the ground. The only thing that saved my life was all the branches that I hit on the way down. And
Wow.
I laid there for probably 5 minutes looking up in the tree and going, this is crazy. Wow. I was in the tree watching myself fall out of the tree. That's kind of like like a sad story. Like that boy ain't been long out of the trees. But that changed everything as well. That sort of added that step, and it was like we are not these bodies. We don't die.
Hmm.
So flash ahead, years ahead through all the different segments of my life, and I find myself floating at the ceiling of my bedroom. And for some reason, I knew that everything was about to change, that I had to change. And so I informed the party that I was no longer interested in party politics and that I wouldn't be running.
Wow.
The meeting was supposed to be on Monday, so I backed out of that because I knew there was something, it just didn't feel right anymore. So, anyway, I found out that Bob Monroe had written that second book called Far Journeys and that he'd created this facility in Virginia, which was a world leader in consciousness research.
Hmm.
And that people from all over the world could go there and spend a week and have these amazing experiences. And so I have to sign up for that. So I did. And I headed off to Virginia and for what they call the Gateway Program and had an amazing experience. Um, yeah, it just blew my mind. It was remarkable. But I got to meet Bob Monroe and I returned numerous times because this was so powerful. So I returned for their next program, for guidelines, and then Lifeline, and all of the different programs. But I got to spend some time with Bob, and we got along really well, and we hit it off. Because Bob had been a broadcaster as well, and he liked the fact that I was in politics. And here was an interesting thing, because in Swift Current, Saskatchewan, pardon me, an amazing, beautiful place with wonderful people, but the population probably 70% Mennonite,
Hmm.
so German, Catholic, Christian kind of thing. I mean, they heard about those near-death experiences, but that ain't Jesus. And if
Yep.
you talk about out-of-body experiences, well, you are the devil, you know. So I didn't tell many people about it. I didn't talk about it um, while I was the mayor, especially not around election time. And the interesting
Yeah.
because I got reelected like 5 or 6 times. Anyway, he, um, during the time that I spent in Virginia, um, and and I became friends with Bob, and Bob was trying to convince me to become a trainer at the institute, and I was like, and at the time I owned an insurance brokerage. I have a degree in insurance and contract law, and I'm running a city, and I'm like, Bob, oh God, thank you, but I'm way too busy. I got politics and business, but no way. And so anyway, when Bob died, I got to spend also some time inside the isolation chamber,
Oh.
and some interesting things. They had created this special chamber, complete darkness and on a waterbed, and hooked up, if to brainwave monitors back in the old days with the 23 diodes, and stuff like that. They developed later on to a different kind of a process, but measuring and mapping out brain waves and all sorts of things like that. It was just so interesting and so cool. And some of the experiences that I had, or some of the things I told them about, got somebody's attention. And one day I was introduced to this guy named Dale Graff, and he was the Pentagon director of this top secret program called Stargate, in which the U.S. intelligence services and the CIA had developed a program in response to the Soviets. Back in the early 70s, late 60s, they had intelligence that the Soviets had, and back in those days, it was like everything was a battle with Russia. It was like the space race, the arms race, and everything else. And so they were really concerned about it. They had intelligence that told them that secret spies, mental spies, if you will, or psychic spies in Russia could literally sit down in Moscow and draw out diagrams of missile sites in America. And that got them very concerned. They thought, whoa, how do we defend against this? And so the place where they had been dealing with, the only place that they had really structurally been dealing with at that time was the Stanford Research Institute in California. And there were two physicists there, Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, who had been working on ways of testing psychic ability and things like that. So this CIA agent assigned to the task, named Kit Green, and he headed off to California to talk to these scientists to see if this is possible. And so his question going out there was like, is this possible? We have reports that the Russians, they have psychics who can spy on America, and they're really concerned. And Russell Target helped put up, and of course I wasn't there, so I was just summarizing. And they said, yeah, it's possible. And I got to meet all of these people later on. So then the second question is, well, oh wow, how do we defend against it? And they pretty much said, well, good luck.
Yeah.
But it begged the third question, which is this something we could do? And so these two physicists were, hey, government contract. Of course, I'm being facetious about it, but they were an amazing pair of physicists. These weren't just some California psycho testers. They were an amazing pair of physicists. They'd done work with lasers, top secret work with lasers and things like that, and they were testing for psychic abilities. So they were working with a guy named Ingo Swann, who was he was an artist and a psychic, a corner store psychic, if you will, from out of California or out of New York City. And they were working with another guy named Pat Price, who was a former homicide detective from Los Angeles. And they were doing the testing that you might typically do. Like, for example, they would do a test where here's 5 cards on the table. One of them has a picture underneath. Which one is it? And these two guys had amazing success rates. And Pat Price especially had developed this ability to be able to project himself, if you will, to any place on the planet. And so
Yeah.
they had a contract. Stanford Research Institute got a contract from CIA, from Defense Intelligence Agency, to see if they could develop a program that would be akin to the Soviets and have perhaps defend against it. And so after 5 months or 6 months, and something like I'm not sure, but what the amounts were,
Mhm.
they got um, were supported by the government, and they developed this, and it was mostly Ingo Swann who put together the process and how what the process became. Ingo was quite sure that this is a natural ability that every single human being has. And this is what they discovered. And this, in fact, was true. And that it's that part of us that is connected to everything. That might seem like an absurd statement, but just to test that out, every single one of us has had an experience like this where you might be sitting somewhere in a park or in a mall or wherever it is, and all of a sudden you get the feeling that somebody's watching you.
Mhm.
And you look around and there somebody is. What part of you knew that? What part of a mom knows her kid's in trouble 3,000 miles away? It's
Yes.
that part that we all have that is connected to everything else. And so, what Ingo Swann and Pat Price and Russell Targan helped put up developed, understanding that if we occupy our left brain with a boring menial task, our left brain is what keeps us alive and what keeps us aware and what makes us jump out of the way if a tiger jumps out of the wall, right? It's that part of us that keeps us alive, but it's that part of us that if we occupy with a boring menial task, it allows us to move into the right hemisphere of our mind, which is connected to the rest of the universe. And so all we have to do is come up with a way to keep our left brain occupied with a boring menial task. So one of the things that everybody who's ever driven a car probably will experience this, and certainly farm boys. I mean, I used to, from the time I was 12 years old, I'm driving a tractor with a 12-foot disker behind. And do you know how many rounds it takes to do an 80-acre field with a 12-foot cultivator
Hmm.
at 1.25 miles an hour? Oh my God. So
Mind.
your mind is occupied with a boring menial task, and my right hemisphere is solving the problems of the world. What allows that to happen? All right. And we've all done this. You might be in Alberta. You might be driving from Edmonton down to Calgary. It's like 3 hour drive.
Yeah.
Manual task, and then you get to it, and the time just appears, and you get to Calgary. Like, oh my God, what happened to Red Deer? Which is always a good question, anyway.
Isn't that the truth?
So, no offense, Red Deer. So we get, but what allowed that to happen
Yeah.
was the fact that we were occupied. Your left brain was occupied with a boring menial task, which allows you to finish that conversation you had with Lucy last week, and and finish this and figure out problems and all sorts of things. But what if you could harness that ability of moving past out of the physical? And so I discovered when I was at the Monroe Institute that in a meeting, this guy named Dale Graff, who's just amazing, and it's like he's the Pentagon director of this secret program, or then he was the former Pentagon director, and they thought that because of some of the experiences that I told them about when I was in the isolation chamber, they thought that I perhaps had an ability for this thing they called remote viewing, and they had developed this program. And what they discovered is that people that had had near death experiences seemed to have an extra ability in this. And so they put out the word through all the divisions, whether Army, Air Force, so on and so forth, and said, hey, if you got some guys or girls who've been blown up and they're talking weird stuff now, we want to talk to them.
Hmm.
So that's where they recruited so many of the people, or some the people that were in, that eventually became what they call remote viewers in Stargate. Not the least of which, of course, was perhaps the most talented Joe McMoneagle, who did some amazing, amazing things. And Patricia, you've taken a class with Joe as well.
I did back in February, and yeah, he's an amazing teacher as well. But Paul, I gotta say, the first class that I took with you, you had me blasted out of my body, and it was so easy with the way that you described it, and going through, how you get the fuzzy buzz going on in your body and you feel like you're almost fractalating and dissolving, and the static, and exactly the way you described it. It was like your instructions were so easy to be able to get out of the body. And Joe doesn't cover, he didn't cover astral projection in the course. Same thing with the spirituality behind remote viewing, because there is, when we're leaving our body and we're going into those different higher dimensions, you're going to see everything from angels to demons to aliens to everything. It's out there, you guys, dragons, it's all real in those higher dimensions, and you see it all. So I love that you cover that and you do prepare people for what you're going to see, because yeah, there's lots of entities, people that are stuck in that, what is it, locale 2, I think that
Void.
Robert describes it as. And the one thing that I love though is that in the book, Journeys Out of the Body, he describes how locale 1 is real time still. You're out of your body, but you're viewing things in real time. And I wanted to say, when you were talking about, floating above in the church on the Saturday, you probably were exactly at, we'll say, 1 o'clock, whenever you died, floating on that church ceiling in real time in locale 1. So you can still see what's happening in the third dimension in real time. And it's the same thing with, like, when people astral travel at night, or I don't know, when I do, you can see all the energy in the air, and it's still dark. It's still dark in the house because all your lights are off. That's why it's dark when you first hop out of your body, because you're going through locale 1 in real time. But it's when you blast into that other dimension that really you travel at the speed of thought, you move at the speed of thought, and oh, I wanted to also tell you this. I don't know if I shared this with you or not, but when I went, because I just went to the Monroe Institute and had my mind blown. You want your mind blown? Go to the Monroe Institute. Don't go anywhere else. Go to the Monroe Institute. They are the best of the best. And when I went there, I did have quite the astral experiences. It was really easy. I think the whole place is sitting on a vortex. I really genuinely believe that Robert Monroe was a genius on where he even situated the buildings, and the big 8,000 pound rock gem crystal. That's what I'm looking for, crystal in the middle of the field. So there's definitely something to it, because I found myself out of my body every night so easy. And this is the part I don't know if I told you. Robert Monroe is still teaching. He is still teaching. He's teaching in the astral. I've been to school. I told him every night, I said, come get me. I want to see the astral school. This is the weird thing. So instantly I get out, and it was like I was going up through the stone. So I know that stone is a gateway. And when I got there, so the carpet is a royal red. It's red. And you know how in the building where we eat and everything, and we sit downstairs, where the
Fox Den. They
thank you,
call it the
Fox.
Fox Den.
You know how when you go upstairs, it's got that landing where you can kind of look down? There's something like that very similar in the astral school. I saw the hallways. There's one big long hallway, and it was like that, where it had a railing that you could look down, and it still looks like it was built in the 60s or 70s, because it had royal red carpet. And guess who I saw teaching there? Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart
Oh,
Tolle knows how to astral project. I believe he's teaching. They must have known each other at some point or on a spiritual level or something. Because I was shocked when I went into the classroom and I saw him and it sounded just like him. Like, Eckhart Tolle has this very low, monotonous voice where he talks really slow. Oh, he was doing that even in the astral. So he's got him teaching up there. So it's very, very real. And there was a bunch of people sitting on the floor in the classroom. They were just sitting. They weren't at tables like we were. But it's interesting because I've been there a couple times now since I left the Monroe Institute. So, because I was worried that that would only be available to me if I was there, but I've since still been able to get out and do that. So, have you experienced Robert on the other side or in the astral? Have you bumped into him in the astral?
many times. That's not unusual. A lot of people do,
Really?
especially at the center in Virginia.
Yeah,
Um,
he's
um,
there.
so what happened? 'Cause Bob and I were friends, and he wanted me to be a trainer, and I was like, Bob, I haven't got time for this. I'm sorry. And so when Bob died in '95 or '96, I can't remember. I think '95.
Yeah.
Um, and Bob's daughter Lori Monroe took over. And one of the first times I was down after that doing a program when Lori was the president, Lori called me into the office, and she said, Paul, Daddy always said you'd be a good trainer. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. I'll do it. And so, and that was, oh my goodness, that was 20 some years ago, 22, 23 years ago. And so I became a trainer and went through the training process in Virginia. And the purpose of it was because I taught remote viewing. It was the first, trainers, and when I was in the isolation chamber, and a lot of this didn't make sense to me because, Bob put me in there, and there's this other guy who's like a lab techie named Skip, and he had
Mm,
this goatee, and he was, wonderful guy, and he'd be the one who's, coming on sometimes and asking me questions over my headphones when I'm in the isolation chamber, as I'd be, scattering into the universe, and this voice would come on and say, "Tell us what's happening," jolt me up,
yes.
and then I find out that he used to be Captain Fred Atwater,
Hmm.
and he was the manager of the Stargate intelligence program at Fort Meade in Maryland, where Joe McMoneagle worked, and that when Skip retired from the Army, Bob Monroe hired him at the Institute in Virginia as the technical. I can't think of the name of it, but in the technical department, sort of. My brain is a little fuzzy today. I got no sleep last night, or virtually no sleep last night. So
The
yeah.
energy's a little weird right now, Paul, so it doesn't surprise me. It's what a month this week has been. I'll just say that.
Yeah. Yes. So anyway, so I was hired, and basically I taught the remote viewing program with Skip Atwater, with Captain Atwater, for about 10 years until Skip retired, and Joe McMoneagle took over. And we had some amazing experiences over those years. We learned a lot of stuff, or I did, especially about all of the processes, and and teaching, and how if you go, I think I learned more as a teacher than as a
Mm-hmm.
practitioner, because I get to watch and look over people's shoulders as they're doing their work, and I go, oh, that's cool, as we're going through all of these things. So we spent 10 years as as a remote viewing instructor, Skip Atwater and I, at the Institute. And then when Skip retired and Joe McMoneagle took over, but our schedules didn't line up, and so Joe began working with a couple of ladies down there who were doing an excellent job as well. But you have to understand, um, Joe McMoneagle is a natural. Joe can just do this.
Yeah.
He's amazing. But maybe you can't teach what Joe does, because
Uh,
he's in his own rhythm, and he is just he's incredible, right?
mhm.
So
He's got his own way.
yeah, yeah, and so but Joe is really a national relic, and does amazing stuff. So I have been, as mentioned, I've been teaching remote viewing now for, oh gosh, 20 some years, and and I've never worked for Stargate, and I want to make that plain because I'm a Canadian. However, I've helped out on looking for missing people, looking for bad guys, looking for different things like that. So, um, but what I found the most incredible, the most wonderful was the actual process of teaching, because I learned more from teaching than from doing, if you will. Well, there's a combination of both, right? So we've done some, it is probably one of the blessings of my life. I just absolutely love sharing that ability. And even on weekend workshops where I used to do, this was just crazy because back 10 years ago,
Mhm.
I'd be doing like 7 or 8 or 6 or whatever programs at the Institute in Virginia. And
Mhm.
there were some years where I would do weekend workshops where I'm doing a level 1 remote viewing, and then a level 2 remote viewing, a level 3 remote viewing. And there were some years where I did as many as, I think it was 26 weekend workshops, in
Wow.
addition to 6 or 7 or whatever at the Institute in Virginia. And so it was just sort of a remarkable thing. And the reason I remember this, so working on my income tax and costs and all of this, and discovered that I had been on 56 airplanes that particular year.
Wow.
But each trip to Virginia is 6 aircraft, so it's, three
Yes.
each way. So you
Been there.
do,
It's
yeah,
cool.
you do, yeah, you do 8 of those, and you got 40 some, in addition to, like, so what I would do say a level 1 workshop each year. Would start out in Vancouver at the Masonic Hall or something like that. It had some great facilities, or at a hotel that I would rent a conference room. And so I would have a weekend workshop in Vancouver, and then the next weekend it would be in Calgary, and the next weekend after that in Edmonton, and then in Winnipeg and in Toronto, and go right across the country. And then 2 months later, come back and do a level 2 across the country. So I got to meet so many amazing people,
Yeah.
and some interesting things about it. I mean, you, Patricia, have amazing abilities as well,
Thank
as
you.
you know. But what we discovered, and I get access to, over the years, access to a whole bunch of tests and studies and data and things like that. And what maybe it shouldn't have surprised me, one of the things that we discovered is that people, obviously, that had near-death experiences um, seem to have an extra ability.
Hmm.
So, like in the Army days, though, back in the US, they thought it was because these people had developed this, they could return to this pathway in the mind that takes them. And maybe there's some truth to that, but I think more than that is that you cannot have a near death experience without going through it a million times in your mind.
Yes.
And the
Hmm.
more time you spend in here, the more you understand how you process thought.
Hmm.
And so, in teaching all of these, and I've seen some amazing people, but people that have had, so um, near death experiences or other experiences, and
Hmm.
some of the things that really, in a way, surprised me, but shouldn't have. Um, People with near death experiences, um, adults who had been abused as children, whether it was mentally, physically, or sexually,
Hmm.
also have amazing abilities, or many of them, some of them do.
That makes sense. That makes,
And
because
And
they.
I got to read some of the data on it and some of the psychological, the tests and, and then get to read a report and where this adult is talking who had been abused, as a kid was talking to a psychiatrist and tells the psychiatrist, well, when it got really bad, I would go into the wall.
That's yes. They click out.
So yeah, so they had learned how to disassociate from their bodies. They
Mm-hmm.
went somewhere else. And now, 30 years later or 20 years later or whatever, that ability, that hidden ability is still there. So what I've discovered is that this is an innate ability. There is not a single human being on this planet over the 25 years that I've been teaching remote viewing, and I should mention, remote viewing is probably a misnomer. It should be called remote sensing. And
Yeah.
we'll talk about that process a little bit later on. It's actually probably more appropriate to call it remote sensing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Many years ago, and I've come across people who haven't had a near-death experience or anything else, and they're totally amazing
Yeah.
in what they do. And one of the first, where this sort of rocked my boat, this is probably 15 years ago here on the island doing weekend workshop. And so we can take people Friday evening, Saturday, and Sunday. And I've taught, oh gosh, around 3,900, almost 4,000 people in
Wow.
remote viewing. And I haven't run into a single one who just didn't get it. I'm certainly some are better than others, but everybody has this ability. It's a natural, innate ability.
Mm-hmm.
And where it sort of knocked my socks off was this is about 15 years ago on the island here, and had a young lady come to the weekend workshop, and she walks in on Friday evening into the conference room, and she's got, excuse me, she's got two, she's walking with cane, and she's like in her early 30s, I would think, very pretty blonde lady, walking in with a cane. And what happened when she was 19, she was like a regular, outgoing, let's go to party and that kind of stuff, having fun with her friends, and was in a wild car accident and literally went overnight from being an outgoing teenager to sitting in her bedroom being told you're never going to walk again.
Wow.
So, and she was amazing in every way. It was just stunning. And I thought, how is this possible? But it begins to make sense when we examine it, right? What would you do if that was you? You're told your whole life has just changed. Forget the party, forget your friends. You're going to be sitting in your room in a wheelchair
Yeah.
for the rest of your life. Well, you would go through this process of disbelief. It's sort of like, how can this be happening to me? To anger, how can this be happening to me? And finally, in self-pity, how could this be happening to me? But the more time you spend in here, the more you learn how you process thought,
Mm-hmm.
how you place yourself in the universe, how you find out things, or how you can determine just by your heart. And one of the things that I teach in remote viewing, I mean, certainly the process itself contributes to that, and and allows you to move into the right hemisphere of your mind.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest admonition that I've found is to follow your heart.
Yes.
Your left brain will make up stuff because you want to be right, you want to be correct, you want to be first, right? Your left brain makes up stuff to protect you. Your heart never lies to you,
Mm-hmm.
all right?
True.
So trust your gut feeling. Anytime you've ignored your gut feeling, how did that go? Not so good, right?
Absolutely.
And what we found, even in teaching and training remote viewing, doing remote viewing classes and so on and so forth, is targets that have an emotional content to them,
Mm.
people are much more successful in getting those.
Can I tell you why? Can I tell you why that is?
Sure.
Because emotion is energy in motion. And if you think of when you're angry, you feel that poof going off inside of you, right? That poof, or when you've been scared. Well, that poof is like loosh or energy that goes out into the atmosphere. And so when a target, and here's the other thing, if a target is really old, that will also be an easy target to find. And I can tell you what I just found. I don't know if I should say it on the air, but I was working on a really cool project, and we found something that has a really bad history to it, but it's good that we found it. Anyways, the more emotion, energy in motion, the more anger, hatred, the poof, the bigger the emotion, the easier that target is because it gets trapped in that place, right? If you think of brick and mortar in England, for example, it's very porous. It's very porous. So of course, the energy and the spirits or the imprint, the energetic imprint of everyone who's ever lived in those houses is still there. This is where psychometry comes from, where we can literally, put someone's ring or object in our hand and go, oh yeah, this was your great grandmother Jenny, and tell all about her life because the energetic imprint is poured into that. And the more a person wears an object, like a wedding ring will be an easy thing to read because the more it's worn, the more the energetic imprint pours into it. So I think that's why when there's been a big emotional imprint or energetic signature to a place, it's going to stand out. You can't hide it in the astral. Nothing hides. It's almost like the more you try to hide something, the brighter it glows. Speaking of that, I have to ask you a question. Is there a way to actually block out a remote viewer? Because there's nothing that I haven't been to remote view right now, but I'm thinking if we'll say the Pentagon or Area 51, if they did have a way to block us out, I would think it would be by a band of specific frequencies. What do you think?
Um,
Anything you couldn't get into?
I'm not sure. Well, there, yeah.
Can we
I
actually
know, I
blocked?
know of some things that I can't that I can't really share. One of the things that some of the folks in the Stargate program or in the intelligence services have developed is, so you can imagine back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on and so forth. We've got the Russians, the Soviets, and we've got America, um, remote viewers. If you can get into somebody's mind, why couldn't you get into the mind of a remote viewer and see what the hell they're up to, right? So how do you set up a defense to keep somebody out of your mind, like a remote viewer, for instance? And so some have developed what they called a firewall.
Oh,
Right. Okay. And I've only had on about 2 or 3 occasions where I've had somebody trying to get into my mind while I'm doing some work. All right. On one of those occasions, it was another remote viewer working on the same project.
oh, interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and it was pretty cool because I actually saw him eventually, and was like, oh.
Wow.
So the one of the things that was shown, and the reason I knew this is because I'm seeing this person or getting the impression of this person. I'm sitting there and I'm getting into his mind, and all of a sudden I get a burst of heat. It's just like, I'm like, whoa. And oh shit, he's a remote viewer.
So did he know what
And so,
he knew? He was trying to get in past the firewall? Did he know?
um, well, no, yeah, he knew I was, wherever this was, he knew that I was penetrating or getting into his thoughts. All right.
Gotcha.
So all of a sudden I get this burst of heat. And to make it sort of make sense or rationalize it, what do we do with our computer if we want to keep somebody out or some foreign thing out? We create a firewall, right? And
Absolutely.
that's literally what they do or can, some of them have developed this ability to create a firewall in your mind to keep people out.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, so there are ways to do it, for sure. There's so many. There's you know this is what I find so fascinating, and it's like the 12-year-old in me is maintained forever because I'm so excited. It's like, you won't believe this. This is so cool. And out of the 3,900 people or whatever that I've taught in remote viewing or whatever, and I haven't run in, certainly some are much better at it than others. Some are natural, some are, but everybody can do it. Everybody can get the basic concepts, travel through time and space and, to be able to do this. The more you practice, the better you get. You
Absolutely.
don't get better you get better from screwing up.
Mm-hmm.
my my spirit guide told me once, Melder told me once that if you could go through life and not a single bad thing would happen, you wouldn't have learned a thing.
It's so
So
true.
we learn from, and my friend Penny Holmes, Bob and Rose's stepdaughter, succinctly placed it one day, and she says, sometimes that shit of a mess that you had yesterday, that's tomorrow's fertilizer for growth,
Absolutely.
which is the truth. Yeah. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
The,
I was just going to say, thank God that you made it through all those near-death experiences. Because, Paul, I got to say, in 2015, the first time I took your course, maybe it was 2014. No, I started taking your classes when I still owned the shop. So that was like 2012,
yeah.
2011, 2012. But I took my first residential program with you in 2015, I believe it was. I came out after taking your course. I ended up finding 9 missing people that summer. And literally using the techniques that you taught me with remote viewing and astral projection, being able to go get information on the target, see it from that bird's eye view, bring it back. And it's just, I thank God nothing happened to you because people like me have needed to learn from people like you because it is once you get going with it and once you realize what you can see, it's mind blowing. It's mind
Mm.
blowing. And that's, it's funny because I can't necessarily even have a conversation with a skeptic anymore because I just laugh at them and go, I feel so sorry for you. I feel so sorry for you. You have no idea what you're missing. You have no idea what you're capable of. And I look at skeptics as, just really stuck in their 3D. And what a sad way to live because there is so much. I don't you can't even call it magic or fluke or coincidence or anything like that. You know what you're doing when you're trained. How to get out of your body, go get information on the target, and bring it back. And I'm up to 35 missing people now that I've found. And I can tell you, Paul, I can't thank you enough for teaching me the way you have and what you have. Because, like I said, I can completely attribute specifically for sure those 9 people were found that summer because I took your course. And yeah, it's just it's mind blowing. Do you have to deal with skeptics anymore? They're not really part of my reality anymore, actually, are they? Not really part of your reality
Um,
anymore.
well, the ones who are skeptics just keep their mouth shut and just
Yeah,
wander off somewhere.
yeah,
But you know, yeah, there are skeptics in my life, but how do you change that is by proving to them otherwise.
absolutely.
So we do, like when I say like a weekend, I love the weekend remote viewing courses, like a level 1 course. First time, first exposure. Start Friday evening, Saturday, and Sunday, And guess what? By Sunday afternoon, we can put you into the mind of any person on this planet and you can describe their location. So
Yeah.
how does that happen? Okay. And this is an amazing thing for people. And what we do, and we don't just pick some poor sap somewhere. All right. So what we do, we call it an outbounder sessions, where we'll have an actual person somewhere on the planet, and me being the organizer of it, and I have a bunch of friends from Australia and from all over around the world or whatever, and so might make an arrangement with them and say, okay, Sunday afternoon at this time period, wherever it is, might be a 6 hour time period difference between them or wherever, go to a certain location. You pick the location, and then we'll get our remote viewers going in the classroom here and have them describe what they're feeling, and they're reaching out and connecting with your mind.
Yes.
So whatever you're going to, and it's sort of, this is why I call it remote sensing, because they're going to be, okay, if I was there in this person's mind, what would I hear? What would I smell? What would I taste? What would I, think? All right. And just project yourself to this other person. And it actually, for a lot of people, it works better, actually connecting with the real consciousness of somebody. So what we do is we'll have them do the half hour or whatever, write down all their impressions. What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? What do you see? What do you describe this all? And then after that, we'll get the person on a speakerphone or on a video call. And I go out of the room and I'll get them on the call. They might be in London, or all over the world, or in New Zealand, or wherever. And they'll come back into the room and say, okay, now introduce yourself and tell us where you are and describe your location. And then we'll show them some video and some photographs of the location that these people are. This blows people's minds because it works so amazingly well. People pick up, but they pick up little things, little nuances that you wouldn't expect.
Paul,
we have yes, exactly.
And this was the outbounder exercise with Patricia in Lake Eola Park, and I drew the whole story. The fountain, the buildings in the background, the water, the trees. It's like you're merging with their energy, and all of a sudden it all opens up and you're literally feeling through their senses. And yeah, so I had to show that because it's proof that you can actually do this.
But yeah, what Patricia's talking about is a friend of mine, Patricia, and went to this place, Lake Eola, and in what's this city? I can't remember.
Orlando, Florida.
Orlando, yes, of course. And Patricia works with Dale Graff, who was the former Pentagon director of Stargate. And so she's very aware of all of the things involved in it. And so she would go and she would specifically look at something and she would register that in her mind. And then she would, become aware of, what do I hear? What do I smell? What do I taste? And just an amazing projection for her. And so Patricia's helped out many times in different sites and places like that. So
which is wonderful. And it is really a small world when it comes to remote viewing. It is, because even you and I have even worked on the same missing person cases with big time accuracy with that. You know exactly what case I'm talking about. It's interesting where this stuff can take you. So as you know, my passion is missing person cases. And for anyone out there, no, I'd never have charged a cent for my missing person cases. I believe that, if God gave me this crazy ability to be able to locate someone's loved one, I have to do it for free. I have to. It's just, I got ethics, morals, yada, yada. However, guess what else this has opened up for me? Working with archaeologists on ancient burial sites and massacre sites and being able to find artifacts. So that, and I never in a million years thought that I'd be able to do that, but I thought when I was presented, with the target, or the task rather, when I was presented with the task, I'm like, yeah, I'm up for that. I could try and do that. Paul, thank you for teaching me remote viewing. I can't thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Because literally, when you know how to be able to get that projection, to tune into that energy, that field, it just opens up, and really there's nothing that you can't see, right? So
Totally.
I
It's, yeah.
just noticed the time, and we've gone way over time. But I love chatting with you about this stuff. It is a huge passion of mine. And I am heading back down to the Monroe Institute at the end of August to finally do the Gateway program. I don't know why. I thought I actually had done that program, but it was the near death experience course that I took. That was really, really cool too, with you and Scott Taylor. I loved it. But I'm finally doing the Gateway program in August, so I'll let you know how it goes. I'm going to take all of you guys with me and do a bunch of lives and Q&As right from the Monroe Institute. And yeah, and if you ever want your mind blown, take a course by Paul Elder. He's the best of the best. I love Joe. He's great, but man, oh man, you're the full meal deal. You cover the psycho spiritual, that all of that. You warn people about what we need to know. So you do the science and the spiritual aspect of things. So you're an amazing teacher, Paul. You really are.
Thank you very much, love.
Yeah, and now you've written a book called Eyes of an Angel. Excellent, excellent book. I have it. I literally pulled it out of my nightstand to bring it to hold it up. And of course, I forgot it as I was walking out the door. But excellent, excellent book. Ooh, there you go. Awesome. Eyes of an Angel by Paul Elder. Phenomenal book. And if people want to get a hold of you to take any of your courses at the Monroe Institute, how do they register?
Well, pretty much now it's just because I'm semi-retired, so I no longer have a facility on the island here, and so I just do the classes where I'm a trainer at the Institute of Virginia. So basically, for folks who are interested in that, go online and look up the monroeinstitute.org, and you can get all the information you need.
And you know what? That is a professional goal of mine too. It's on my bucket list to someday, hopefully, be able to teach there or do something on a deeper level with the Monroe Institute. Because yeah, it's definitely a calling for sure, and I hear it calling my name. So I thank you so much, Paul. We're gonna have to do a second interview because, honest to God, I have so much that I would love to ask you, because even my viewers have bombarded me with questions, and it's like, oh, I'd love to get Paul's take on this. So hopefully we can do a part two, at some point, and get your take on more, because it's fascinating. You're fascinating, Paul. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And everybody out there in YouTube land, thank you so much for watching. Yeah, God bless. We'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody.